So guys, as you all know, last season our defense was one of the biggest disappointments in the NFL, finishing dead last in total defense and 27th in points allowed, struggling in almost every major area. That's why all offseason we've been talking about how Daronte Jones was brought in to completely change the identity of this defense with a faster, more aggressive system. At the time, it was just an offseason hype. But now that training camp is underway, we're finally seeing that hype turn into reality. Reports from the first two practices show this defense flying around the field, creating constant pressure, locking down receivers, and even making Jayden Daniels and the first-team offense work for every play. So let me break down exactly what happened at training camp and why fans have every reason to believe this defense is finally heading in the right direction. What's up, Commanders Nation? Welcome to the NFL Playbook Commanders. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. From day one, the reports coming out of practice have been consistent. This defense is fast, like noticeably fast. Multiple people who were actually at practice pointed out that the speed on this unit is a completely different level compared to what we've had the past few seasons. And look, speed alone doesn't win you games, but it changes how much ground your defense can cover, how quickly they can close on the ball, and honestly, it changes the entire identity of a unit. For the first time in a while, I feel like we actually have players who fit the scheme instead of trying to force guys into roles they were never built for. So let's start with the front seven, because that's where this whole thing starts. Daron Payne and Javon Kinlaw are still the anchors up front, and you already know what you're getting from those two. They eat up blocks and let everybody else fly around behind them. But the real story of camp so far has been the newer additions. Our big free agency signing this offseason, Odafe Oweh, on that 4-year, $96 million deal. He has already been making his presence feel off the edge, getting into the backfield consistently, and even batting down a pass from Jayden Daniels during red zone work. Now, I know it's only camp, and I know we shouldn't get carried away off one practice, but when your highest paid free agency addition is already showing up like that on day one, you take notice. And now with Oweh already healthy and disruptive, plus K'Lavon Chaisson brought in for extra depth on the edge, this group doesn't have to wait for Dorance Armstrong and Deatrich Wise to be dangerous. It's already deep before those two even return. And from what Coach Dan Quinn said, Armstrong specifically looks like he's ahead of schedule. That's huge for us because depth on the edge was a real concern heading into the summer. Once those two are back to full strength, this pass rush is going to have another gear that we simply didn't have last season. Now, before we move to the back end of this defense, I want to talk about something that honestly doesn't get enough attention, and that's the interior rotation up front. Jer'Zhan Newton has been getting real reps alongside Daron Payne and Javon Kinlaw, and from what's being reported, the coaching staff is not easy on these guys at all. There's actually been talk about how intense the new defensive line coaching has been at camp, guys getting corrected hard the moment they take a rep off or line up wrong, and honestly, I love hearing that. Last year, we saw way too many lazy reps up front, too many plays where our line just got pushed around because guys weren't playing with urgency. This year, it sounds completely different. Every single rep is being coached like it's a playoff snap, and that kind of standard usually shows up once the season actually starts. When you have that much competition and that much pressure just to hold a rotational spot, it forces everybody to raise their level, and that includes your starters too. Because nobody wants to lose reps to a guy who's playing harder than them. If this interior rotation stays deep and stays disruptive, it's going to make life so much easier for the linebackers behind them, because offensive lines simply cannot double team everybody at once. Now, speaking of guys working their way back, let's talk about the PUP list situation, because this is actually a really encouraging update for the defense. Both Dorance Armstrong and Deatrich Wise Jr. started camp on the physically unable to perform list, but Coach Dan Quinn gave a really positive update on both of them. He basically said that once a guy starts on PUP, it means he's already turned a corner and is getting close to returning. And out of the two, it sounds like Armstrong is the closer one to making his way back onto the field. That's massive for this defense because when healthy, Armstrong brings exactly the kind of edge presence that fits what Daronte Jones wants to do schematically. He can set the edge against the run, and he can still get home as a pass rusher when the moment calls for it. Wise is a little further behind, but the fact that both guys are already working out on the side of practice instead of being stuck inside doing rehab tells you they are trending in the right direction. Once camp starts adding pads and these two get fully cleared, the pass rush rotation is going to look completely different and honestly a lot scarier for opposing offenses. And now let's talk about the linebackers because this is where things get really interesting. Sonny Styles is a rookie, so obviously the coaching staff is easing him in the same way they did with other young guys in years past, but even in a limited role, you're already hearing his name pop up. He nearly picked off a pass and showed off the kind of range you just don't normally see at that position. And that's the thing about this defense now. It's not just about being physical anymore. It's about having athletes who can run sideline to sideline and still make plays in coverage. Frankie Luvu is expected to be a big part of the blitz packages this year too, and honestly, watching him fly downhill is going to be fun to watch once the season actually starts. Alright, now let's move to the secondary, because this might be the group that surprised people the most through the first two practices. Everybody assumed the strength of this defense would come from the front seven, and don't get me wrong, it will, but the coverage on the back end has genuinely impressed people who watch camp in person. Trey Amos wasn't even practicing yet because of his injury, and even without him out there, the corners were locking things down. Mike Sainristil and Amick Robertson have both been getting praised for their tenacity, and Robertson in particular has a reputation for matching up against anybody, no matter how big or fast the receiver is. That kind of confidence matters, especially early in camp when guys are still figuring out a brand new scheme. And here's what really stood out to me. In 7-on-7 drills, which is normally a situation built completely in favor of the offense, this secondary was still locking guys up. Quarterbacks were holding onto the ball longer than they wanted to, receivers were struggling to separate, and at one point the coaches actually had to call off a play because nobody could get open. When your defensive backs are winning in a setting that's designed to make them lose, that tells you the talent and the scheme are starting to click together. Speaking of the scheme, I have to give credit where it's due. This Daronte Jones defense is complicated. We're talking about a system that disguises coverages before the snap, mixes up pressure looks constantly, and forces the quarterback to process information at a much faster rate than what we saw under the old staff. That's exactly why Jayden Daniels had some up and down moments through the first two practices. His accuracy wavered a little against this defense, and honestly that's a good thing. It means our defense is finally challenging our franchise quarterback instead of just letting him look comfortable every single day. If Daniels can handle pressure like this consistently in practice, imagine how much sharper he'll be once the games actually start, and he's facing defenses that aren't nearly this complex. One thing that really stuck out to me from the reports was how players are already buying into this new scheme. There's been no mention of guys making major mental mistakes or looking lost out there, and for a defense this complex, that says a lot about how well it's being coached and how quickly this group is picking things up. Guys like Quan Martin and free agent addition Nick Cross are getting reps at safety and continuing to build chemistry with the linebackers in front of them, which matters a ton for a defense that wants to disguise coverages before the snap. Now let's shift over to special teams for a second, because there was actually some good injury-related news here too. Jalen Lane is still your guy back there fielding punts, and Luke McCaffrey is expected to handle a chunk of the kick return duties again after doing it last season. Depth at those spots is important, especially with some of the roster turnover we've had, but overall this part of the team looks stable heading into the rest of the camp. Now, here's something else worth mentioning before I wrap this up, because it actually ties everything together. The reason this defense looks so different right now isn't just about talent, it's about scheme fit. Daronte Jones is running a system that's built around disguise and multiplicity, which basically means the defense can show one look before the snap and completely change it the moment the ball is snapped. That kind of scheme only works if your players are athletic enough and smart enough to execute it at a fast pace and based on everything coming out of camp. This group seems to be picking it up quicker than expected. There haven't been reports of guys running to the wrong spot or blowing coverages, which, for a defense this complicated, this early in camp, is honestly a really good sign. It tells you the coaching staff did their homework in the offseason when it came to bringing in players who fit this exact style of defense. And look, I know it's easy to get excited off two practices in shorts and helmets, no pads, no real contact yet, but context matters here too. This isn't just two random practices. This is a defense that finished near the bottom of the league last year, suddenly making our franchise quarterback uncomfortable in team drills. That's not something you usually see this early, especially against an offense that also added new pieces and a new scheme of its own. When both sides of the ball are still installing new systems and the defense is still winning those early battles, that tells you the identity change we were promised is actually showing up on the field, not just in press conferences. So, here's my overall take after digging through everything that came out of the first two practices. This defense looks faster, it looks more athletic, and most importantly, it looks like it finally has an identity. We're not talking about hope anymore, we're talking about actual results showing up on the practice field. Obviously, we have to see how this looks once contact starts, because right now these are non-padded practices, and things can change quite a bit once real hitting begins. But based on what's been reported so far, there's real reason to believe this defense is heading in the right direction. Daronte Jones was brought in to change the culture and the identity of this unit, and through two practices, it genuinely looks like that's exactly what's happening.